Alright, so here is question number 1 for worksheet B for chapters 8 and 10. This one starts out with giving us a cumulative frequency table. We're going to use that to make the graph. So notice on this one, the top row is our x's and the bottom row is our y values. So as you look on down here, all that was defined down here when they give us the scale for the graph. So they refer to the candidates as the vertical axis. So that's telling us this is our y values, and the marks is the horizontal, so that's the way of telling us that the marks is the x-axis. So we're going to use these guys to make some points on the graph. So remember, for a cumulative frequency table, it is cumulative to everything up to that point. So they're saying that the bottom 25 candidates received up to 10 marks. The bottom 135 candidates, which would include those guys, they're within this 135, received up to 20. So on and so on, all the way up to all 2,000 students. And so we first have to make a graph on this one. They're going to give us a scale. So 1 centimeter is 100 on the y-axis, and then 1 centimeter is 10 on the x-axis. And so I've already pre-drawn most of this graph, and so that I can show you what this is going to look like. So I'll show you the scale. I'm also going to show you where I came up with my coordinates. So the first point came from 1025 was my first point. 135 is my second point, and then so on and so on. These all act as my ordered pairs. So let me take you to the graph to show you what that looks like. So this was kind of a large graph, so it's hard to get all this on the screen for you, but I'll do my best here. So right here you can see I have every mark that's a little bit darker, every line that's a little darker represents 1 centimeter. So that's why this is 100, 200, 300, and so on. Going on the x-axis, we got the 10, 20, 30. That was the scale that they were laying out for us. And then you'll see my points on the graph are the ones that I just described, that I pulled right off the table, that took me all the way up to here. For that last candidate is the 100, 2,000 mark. So that's all of it. So we're going to use this graph to start answering a few questions. Keep in mind that if your curve is a little steeper or a little curvier than mine, our answers are going to vary a little bit, and that's okay with these. When these are done on like an IB test, they always give you a little wiggle room for some variation in your answers, but it's all based on the graph that you drew. Typically in test questions, like the one you're going to see on our test, the graph is pre-drawn, and so we should all get the same answer because we're all going to be looking at the exact same graph. But let's start going through a couple of these. So the first one, part B, asks us to first find the median. So the median would be the middle candidate. So if there are 2,000 candidates, that means candidate number 1,000 would represent the median value. So if we go to our graph and find the 1,000th candidate and trace that over and down, that should tell us our median value. So on mine it's 47. Yours might be 1 or 2 off from that, but we should be pretty close. So the next part wants the lower quartile. That would be the bottom 25%. Again, there are 2,000 candidates. So if we took 25% of 2,000, we should be looking at the 500th candidate. And so as I go to my graph again here, if I look at the 500th candidate and trace that one over and down, that's going to give me my lower quartile, which I'm getting as about 36. So you should be pretty close to that on yours as well. Moving on, so candidates who scored less than 35 marks. So notice now they're now giving me an x value to start with. So I'm going to start on the x-axis and trace that up and over to the y-axis to get my answer. So as candidates who scored less than 35 had to retake it. So let's see how many candidates that would apply to. So if we said less than 35, so right here is about 35. And so if I trace that up and over, I'm going to hit my graph right about here. So to the left, I'm seeing that as 480 candidates on mine. And so again, yours might not be exactly that, but should be pretty close. And so the bottom 480 would have to retake it. Now they're talking about the top 20% of candidates receive some kind of an award. So find what mark they would need to get in order to make it into the top 20%. And so if we look at the graph, so again, the top 20%, if I took 20% of 2,000, I get 400. So this is referring to the top 400 students. So I would need to be right here in order to make it into the top 20%. So if I trace that one over and down, let's see, on mine, I'm hitting right here. I'm going to trace that all the way down, and I was hitting 58. So in other words, I would need to get at least a 58 in order to make it into the top 20%. So that's the mark they were looking for. Let's go on to the next one. So part C, so find the number of candidates who scored between 50 and 60, and then the number, how many scored between 70 and 90. So we'll just start with the 50 and 60 group. Let me readjust here, there we go. So how many scored between 50 and 60? So if I look at my graph, how many scored 50? So if I trace my 50 up and over, that's the 1,000. Oh, sorry, a little higher than that. So on mine, looks like my 50, oh, that was given to us, wasn't it? So the 50, they already told us in the table was the 1,200. And the 70 was also given to us. So if we look at this one, those are numbers that are already right here for us. So how many scored between 50 and 60? We can just get those right from this table here. So between 50 and 60 would just be the difference between those. So if I just did 1675 minus 1,200, I'm going to get 475 for those who scored between 50 and 60. And then 70 and 90, same thing. I can just subtract 1960 minus 1825 and get that answer right there. All right, moving on to the next part. Part D, calculate an estimate of the mean. We're not going to do that part because you would only be doing that if you had the raw data table like you see in number 2. This is raw data, and we should be able to calculate a mean from this using our calculator. But on you're not going to have to do it from this where you're given the cumulative frequency table and a graph only. So let me just go over one more thing with you. We're gonna skip E as well because that's not something we're going to be tested on. So I did want to mention one more thing. Keep in mind that in B2 it was asking about the lower quartile. We can also get the upper quartile. That would be the 75th percentile of our data. And so if we found 75% of 2,000, that would tell us that the upper quartile is at the 1,500th candidate. And so if we found 1,500 on the y-axis, you see it over here on the left, and if we trace that one over and down, let's see if I can line that up on mine here. So if I go to 1,500 and trace that one over and down, let's see on my graph, I'm hitting right about here, which would be 56. And so 56 would be my upper quartile. And so if I was asked about the inner quartile range, which is a popular question, remember it's always Q3 minus Q1. So in this case, if I did 56 minus 36, that would give me an inner quartile range. But those are the main things that you're going to need to know from this one.